And then there were two, with the announcement this morning that Elizabeth Warren is suspending her campaign to be the Democratic nominee for the presidency. How is this gonna shake up the race? Joining us now to discuss, Tommy Viator, co-host of Pod Save America and the founder of Crooked Media. Welcome to the show.
Hey, John.
Glad to have you here. You came on a good day. We were gonna talk about what Elizabeth Warren's next steps might be. Well, we now know at least one of them. She's dropped out. What are your thoughts?
I mean, look, I think that this was a decision made out of necessity. She did not really have a path forward. When you look at the delegate count that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have amassed so far, there just wasn't a path. I think that Elizabeth Warren has gone from being, just known as a brilliant professor to being one of the most potent messengers in the Democratic Party, one of the best policy wonks, and the person on a debate stage that you want to mess with the least. So I think she comes out of this having done an enormous amount of good for herself, for her stature, for the party. I hope she is, a key part of the general election campaign. I don't know who she'll endorse. I don't want to pretend to tell her who I think she should endorse. I hope she takes some time and figures it out. But she ran a hell of a campaign.
Well, and we should say that at least the indication this morning is that she does not plan to immediately endorse anyone.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's right. I mean, look, obviously she's aligned with Bernie on a lot of policy issues. I do think it would make a lot of sense in a lot of ways for her to support Bernie because he does have the more progressive agenda. But who knows how this will shake out.
Yeah, exactly. I want to look back just a little bit on what she was able to accomplish. And I think one of the biggest things, actually, we don't have to go back very far. A lot of people are crediting her today as one of the most important things she did was remove what is, at least from my point of view, the worst case scenario in this primary, which was a Michael Bloomberg nomination. And if anyone deserves the credit for knocking him out, it feels like Elizabeth Warren is probably that person.
Yeah, she dismembered him on live TV. It was like a scene from Dexter. It was the most brutal debate takedown I've ever seen in my life. And it took, she wiped out $650 million worth of advertising value in a couple hours. So yeah, pretty impressive.
Yeah, and so I did want to do a little bit of a preview of, we don't know exactly where the endorsement is going to come down, if it does come down, but we can start to try to speculate as to what effect this might have on some of the electoral math going forward. And so to the control room, I'm gonna jump ahead. The most recent poll I saw of who Warren supporters' second choice was, this is by Morning Consult earlier today. Sanders is the second choice of 43%, Biden of 36%. And so, I mean, that is effectively in this sort of thing where these sorts of polls are always going to be a little bit wishy-washy. That seems like kind of a wash right there.
Yeah, it's kind of a wash. I mean, I think what I've seen in some of the exits is that a lot of Warren supporters were white, college educated. I think they skewed women. And I think that that's a demographic profile that, you're right, probably breaks both ways. Late deciders have broken towards Biden recently. I think a lot of people who have been so anxious and worried about politics that they were kind of viewing this like punditry have broken towards Biden. So I imagine he could get a considerable number of the Warren supporters. I just don't think it's clean. There's a lot of people were talking about like there's a progressive lane and a moderate lane, and Bernie and Warren are in the progressive lane. I don't think that really reflects the complexity of how voters view this choice.
Well, and I would say it's fairly obvious on social media that a lot of former supporters of Elizabeth Warren, not necessarily first choice supporters of Elizabeth Warren, feel like she has done quite a bit to try to not appeal to that progressive lane necessarily in some of the moves that she's made rhetorically and in terms of her policy. So I'm curious from your point of view, not in terms of who she'll endorse, but from her own point of view, what do you think her path forward is at this point? Does she stay, regardless if it ends up being Biden or if it ends up being Bernie, does she stay in the Senate to be a Senate ally to one of those two if they become president? Does she try to get some sort of position in the administration? How is that potentially influencing her calculation of who or when to endorse?
It's a good question. I mean, I have no insider knowledge into what she wants to do. The challenge that people should understand, though, is that right now Massachusetts has a Republican governor. So if Warren exits that job and takes an administration job or takes the VP slot or what have you, then Charlie Baker gets to nominate his choice, presumably a Republican, in that seat for a while. And that's probably something that everybody involved wants to avoid. Obviously, Warren has put together, some of the most comprehensive policy papers on every single issue. I imagine she'll be involved as a surrogate and the messenger on the campaign. I mean, I do think that she is going to be one of the most popular people in the party. And whether Biden or Bernie wins, she's going to be someone who we will all look to try to bring both sides together and make sure that we win the general election. So I don't know how to predict. I bet she doesn't even know at this point, but I do think she'll be a big part of the general election.
Yeah, and I would just say, look, I hope that she is looking for advice from the right people, because my view, as again, I endorse Bernie Sanders, but some of the moves that she made in the last 6 months in this primary have been hard to understand, and they don't appear to have done her much good in the primary. So I worry about some of the advice that she's been getting recently, but I guess we'll see. We might have to wait a month or two to find out. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.